Welcome to All About Coffee, a page-by-page podcast. We're exploring William Harrison Ueker's century-old coffee encyclopedia, All About Coffee. One page, one paragraph, one sentence, one rabbit hole at a time, whatever it takes to work our way through over 800 pages of what was arguably the most important coffee book of the 20th century. I'm your host, Chief Annotationist, Director of Digressions, and Vice President of Asides, Mike Ferguson. Welcome to a never-ending journey through every single page, you've been warned, of W.H. Ueker's All About Coffee. The history of the word coffee involves several phonetic difficulties. That's the first sentence from Chapter 1, Page 1 of All About Coffee, and this is Episode 5 of All About Coffee, a page-by-page podcast. Maybe you remember Episode 4 when we covered 16 pages. Well, those days are over, my friends, at least for the foreseeable future. We will only be covering 2 pages in this episode. Chapter 1 is titled Dealing with the Etymology of Coffee, and deal with it Mr. Ueker's does if by deal with it we mean wrestle it to the ground and make it say uncle. The subtitle to Chapter 1 is, quote, Origin and Translation of the Word from the Arabian into Various Languages, Views of Many Writers, end quote. By many writers, he means 33. 33 writers or editors in 2 pages and just under 1,600 words.
Certain numbers possess an allure that transcends mere arithmetic. One such number is 33.
I'm not cheating a little with this count because reference is made in Chapter 1 to an Anglo-Indian colloquial glossary called Hobson-Jobson, a title it will come as no surprise that belittles one of those 2 languages. I count the 2 authors, Yule and Burnell, and the editor, Crook, as 3 of the 33, even though their book is mentioned and they are not. Hobson-Jobson is a fascinating record of English borrowings from Indian languages. If you're a fan of British panel shows, as I am, you might be familiar with Susie Dent, resident linguist in the show 8 out of 10 Cats. Let's have Susie tell us more about Hobson-Jobson.
Historically interesting dictionary from 1872 called Hobson-Jobson, and that is a dictionary of Anglo-Indian words that really came in to English during the British rule of India. Bazaar, mulligatawny, hullabaloo, gincana, dungarees, pajamas, calico, shampoo, so many words that we owe to the wonderful Indian languages.
The list is long. Tip-top, hocus-pocus, tit-for-tat, topsy-turvy. But as we heard from Susie Dent, it's not only these rhymey-timey words. For example, veranda, bungalow, ran amok, loot, cash, bandana, somebody stop me, cot, dinghy, jungle, punch, candy, pundit, seriously, somebody stop me, orange, peacock, crimson, lilac, mugger, sugar, pal, yoga, and zen, to name just a few. Referenced and quoted a couple of times here in Chapter 1, Hobson-Jobson actually contains a very lengthy section on the word coffee that is worth a read if you're into that sort of thing. The text is available online as part of the Gutenberg Project at gutenberg.org. Over the years, Hobson-Jobson as a phrase, or the law of Hobson-Jobson, came in linguistics to mean, quote, the process of phonological change by which loan words are adapted to the phonology of the new language. This is important because I think it is really what Chapter 1 of All About Coffee is about. I might get frustrated as we go, so just keep in mind, all we are really talking about here is this, the process of phonological change. Forget all the vowels and stresses, and the evolution of the word coffee is nothing more than a record of phonological change. I should note there has been much justified criticism of Hobson-Jobson, which I think is summed up by a quote from the novelist Amitav Ghosh, who said, quote, I enjoy the book, but is absolutely ridden with ideas of racial separation. I would never be a guest at their dinner party, end quote. While I'm eager to contextualize Mr. Ueker socially and culturally, for example, as we've seen when he uses phrases like civilized or heathen, I'm less inclined to do so when it comes to science or technology or philology. When he writes about the science of caffeine or the etymology of the word coffee, I'm not going to use 100 years of coffee progress and research to say, aha, caught you getting something wrong. I don't necessarily want to compare and contrast his research to any progress that might have been made over the last 100 years, even if I was qualified to do so. But sometimes I might, you never know. Generally speaking, the theories Mr. Ueker's references on the etymology of the word coffee are the theories that remain with us today. First and foremost among them being that Europeans got the word coffee from the Arabic qahwah, or thawah, or ahwah, or qahwah, or qahwah, Qahwah. Some commentators will express the word as simply qahwah. As far as I can tell, and I could be wrong, the primary pronunciation is something like qahwah, though I think it tends to be shortened over time, and the variants can be explained as dialects. Please note, I am not an etymologist or a linguist or a philologist. I don't even play one on this podcast, so I could be leading you astray. I did my best to capture pronunciations, but if someone wants to tell me I'm off the mark, I'm 100% open to that possibility. The word coffee came to us from kahveh, Kahveh, the Turkish form of the Arabic word qahwah. Mr. Ukers points out that these are names for beverages made from an infusion of the roasted seed and not names for the plant. I suppose he does this because names for the plant could theoretically predate names for the beverage by hundreds of years, and, as I noted in a previous episode, like Mr. Ukers, we always want to clarify what we're talking about when we talk about coffee. And just 3 paragraphs into Chapter 1, we have our first of the 33 names of writers and editors.
One such number is 33.
Despite having no college degree, Sir James Murray was founding editor of the New English Dictionary, which would become the Oxford English Dictionary, OED among word nerds, from 1879 until his death in 1917. Sir James Murray is a potential digression of enormous proportions. I mean, the founding editor of the Oxford English Dictionary. Books have been written, movies have been made. I will do my best to maintain some self-control. Although Murray, who had more than a passing familiarity with over 24 languages, eventually settled on philology and lexicography as his focus, it's clear he could have become an expert in any number of subjects. Alexander Graham Bell, Mr. Watson, come here, I want you, received his early lessons in electricity from Murray and was best man when Murray married his second wife. Bell said James Murray was, quote, the grandfather of the telephone. In 2019, Mel Gibson played Sir James Murray in a movie, The Professor and the Madman, which also starred Sean Penn.
I'm fluent in Latin and Greek, of course, and beyond those, I have an intimate knowledge of the Romance tongues, Italian, French, Spanish, Catalan, and to a lesser degree Portuguese, Vaudois, Provençal, and other dialects. In the Teutonic branch, I'm familiar with the German, Dutch, Danish, and Flemish. I've specialized in Anglo-Saxon and Meso-Gothic, and have prepared works for publication on both these languages. I also have a useful knowledge of Russian. I have sufficient knowledge of Hebrew and Syriac to read at sight the Old Testament and the Peshitta, and to a lesser degree, Aramaic, Arabic, Coptic, and Phoenician, to the point where it was left by Gesenius. Forgive me rattling on.
That was Mel Gibson, in case you've never seen Braveheart. Sean Penn plays William Chester Minor, who was a prolific volunteer working on the OED while a patient at Broadmoor, a psychiatric facility outside of London. In 1908, Murray was knighted for his work on the Oxford English Dictionary. The OED was supposed to be 4 volumes, but ended up being 12 volumes when the first edition was finally published in 1928, and has been continually updated ever since. Recent additions include Windbag, Cosplay, Spidey Sense, Cyberstock, Mic Drop, Smash Cut, Steampunky, and Shiesty, which means deceptive, dishonest, untrustworthy, and is the newest addition to my personal vocabulary. Don't be shiesty. If I understand the paragraph Mr. Ukers devotes to Sir James correctly, he is using Murray to chisel away at the idea that the word coffee could have come from Kaffa, a region in Ethiopia. The birthplace of coffee, the plant, for sure, and it seems likely a coffee beverage of some sort, but not necessarily the beverage extracted from the roasted, pulverized seed of the cherry. Mr. Ukers, apparently paraphrasing Murray on Kaffa being the root of the word coffee, states rather dismissively that, of this, there is no evidence. I think it fair to say that Mr. Ukers was skeptical on Kaffa, but I think it fair to say that Mr. Ukers was skeptical about Africa in general. It might be helpful to remember that compared to today, Africa played a very small role in producing the world's coffee when Mr. Ukers traveled the world in 1906. And that role had not increased much when he wrote All About Coffee. As I've said before, during Mr. Ukers' early days in the industry, coffee from mocha, or labeled as mocha in any case, dominated the minds of coffee drinkers. to the extent that when the Hills Brothers expanded their San Francisco retail location in 1882, they named it Arabian Coffee and Spice Mills.
Hills Brothers coffee so unbeatable, and the proof of this is it's reheatable.
Likewise, in 1906, Hills Brothers started using a brand icon, the Coffee Taster, an illustration of a man drinking coffee in traditional Arab clothing, or more than likely a Western take on Arab clothing at the time. They used this icon until the 1990s. Oddly, or interestingly, or confusingly, the history timeline on the Hills Brothers website does not refer to the coffee drinker as being Arab, but claims the icon was inspired by coffee's Ethiopian roots.
I'm not sure that I agree with you 100% on your police work there, Lou.
Yeah?
Yeah.
But we'll learn more about Mr. Euchers and his attitude toward Africa as we move through the book. Hobson-Jobson states a connection between Kaffa and coffee can be, quote, plausibly traced. I think the similarity in pronunciation, combined with Ethiopia being the birthplace of coffee, is just too tempting to dismiss outright for most commentators. Just in case some type of hard evidence were to emerge someday, they could say, I always said it was possible. Taking ourselves out of Mr. Euchers' day, one recent writer who makes the Kaffa case is Jeff Kohler in his lovely book, Where the Wild Coffee Grows, which I cannot recommend highly enough. If you're one of the brave few who have listened to each episode of this podcast, I can promise you'll enjoy Where the Wild Coffee Grows. Explaining why there is no written evidence of early coffee drinking in Kaffa, Kohler points out that the predominant language for the region wasn't written until the 1990s, but assures us that oral traditions have long told of coffee brewing and drinking. He writes that Kaffa arguably gave the world the word for the drink. I think Kohler makes a fair, if somewhat subjective point, which I'm not mad at, that when you spend time in the once kingdom of Kaffa, feet on the ground, meeting and talking with the people, you can feel the weight of time and the history of coffee to an extent that it's difficult to doubt the history of coffee consumption in that region, whatever form that consumption might have taken, might predate coffee beverage consumption on the Arabian Peninsula. Ultimately, as many authorities will admit, some things are just unknowable. It seems the Arabic word qahwah as a word for wine could have theoretically predated the rise of the kingdom of Kaffa by hundreds of years and was later adopted to mean coffee specifically. It also seems like a lot of etymological work was done on the word coffee at a time when most scholars just assumed coffee brewing was invented or discovered on the Arabian Peninsula, at a time when Ethiopia was still just a rumor to most Europeans, known of but not understood in any meaningful way, and without a written history. So no wonder it is perhaps easier to academically reverse engineer with fewer leaps of faith the word coffee back to the Arabic word qahwah than it is to trace it back to Kaffa, though Kaffa certainly feels more intuitively correct, at least to the not-a-philologist crowd. Add to all of this that the history of Arab people in Africa, and Ethiopia specifically, is long and complicated. It seems impossible to me that we might discover all the borrowings for words, coffee cultivation or processing or preparation of the beverage in either direction. It's conceivable to me that Arab traders started using their word for wine to refer to coffee not only because certain aspects of the word were relevant in terms of meaning, but also because their pronunciation of the word kaffa in Arabic was reminiscent of their pronunciation of qahwah. This is what happened in the opposite direction when the word became kava or kavi in Turkish on its way to Europe. But I'm almost off topic. We'll have plenty of time to talk about the history of coffee as we work through chapters 2 and 3 for perhaps 10 more episodes. The second of 33 writers and editors Mr. Euchers names, and in this case quotes at length, is James Platt, Jr. After getting into a little hot water with the Philological Society for plagiarism at age 22 in 1883, Platt wrote some horror fiction but eventually returned to philology, even working on the OED, focusing on more obscure languages from which English is borrowed. In fact, in the quote Mr. Euchers uses, Platt is critiquing ideas the OED founding editor James Murray had about the word coffee. And that's just about all I can tell you. I've read the paragraph many times and I can't say I comprehend Platt's point. It has something to do with the evolution of the word through various European languages and how the V sound became the FF sound, and something to do with the silent H at the end of cave and O versus U. And whatever it was Sir James Murray thought, James Platt, Jr. didn't necessarily agree. The Platt quote comes from a 1908 edition of a Dutch academic journal called Notes and Queries, which I've also seen translated as Questions and Notes. This issue of the journal apparently contained what Mr. Euchers refers to as a symposium on the word coffee. another contributor to that edition of the Dutch Journal, and the next writer Mr. Euchers references is Verendranath Chattopadhyay, who I'm going to call Chatto because that's the name he went by. Chatto argues, and this time I'm just going to read the passage, quote, "The HW of the Arabic qahwah becomes sometimes FF and sometimes only F or V in European translations because some languages, such as English, have strong syllabic accents, stresses, while others, such as French, have none. The surd aspirate H is heard in some languages, but is hardly audible in others. Most Europeans tend to leave it out altogether." End quote. A surd aspirate, by the way, is when a letter becomes little more than a short exhale, like the H in house, surd being voiceless and aspirate being like aspiration. Okay, so the Chatto quote made me think I was overthinking the previous section by Platt. I think these writers are just simply documenting how the word evolved throughout Europe. There are no great aha moments here, and the nerd fight between Murray and Platt was probably the equivalent of arguing over how many angels can dance on the head of a pin. The idea that the HW in the middle of the Arabic word qahwah sometimes becomes FF or F or V might seem like stating the obvious when you just look around at European words for coffee, but I suppose that writing it all down is an academic necessity. The next writer mentioned by Mr. Euchers is Colonel W.F. Prideaux, and he was yet another contributor to the 1908 coffee edition of Notes and Queries. Mr. Euchers says Prideaux cites the Anglo-Indian glossary Hobson-Jobson to argue that, quote, "the European languages got one form of the word directly from the Arabic qahwah." Hobson-Jobson lists many different words starting with C, all of which, it seems to my admittedly untrained ears and eyes, could be pronounced in a way that would match pronunciation of either the Arabic qahwah or the Turkish qahweh. Despite my lack of experience with these things, I started having the feeling I have when someone doesn't have a lot of information to share, so they share the same information over and over, but just say it in different ways. The 7 words listed by Prideaux from Hobson-Jobson, where the list is actually much longer, along with my best attempts at pronunciation, which I'm happy to have corrected, are qahwah, qahwah, qahu, qaho, kofa, kofe, qahwah. Even if my pronunciations are merely in the ballpark, and experts would point out errors in inflection or accent or vowel sounds, or consonants for that matter, I think we're splitting hairs here if we want to argue that any of these variations are not signposts along the way to the word coffee in English. Unless I'm misreading the text, Hobson-Jobson is also saying that kofa is distinctly Persian, kafe is distinctly Turkish, and qahwah or any of its variants are distinctly Arabic. Once again, I'm not entirely sure I grasp the point. If this type of thing is your thing, there are numerous copies of All About Coffee online. Please access those and read Chapter 1 for yourself. Colonel Prideaux continues to make his case, which I believe is preaching to the choir at this point, by quoting a lengthy passage from the diary of John Jourdan, a sailor which was published in 1905, 300 years after it was written, during his travels along the Arabian Peninsula. Like Prideaux, Mr. Euchers preserves the 1609 spellings from this diary, which is oddly amusing and annoying at the same time. The sailor writes of visiting a qahwah house is spelled with a W, in the desert, staying in the mountains where the qahwah grows, mountain is spelled with a Y, and visiting a little village where they sold qahwah and fruit ends with an E. In each case, he is spelling qahwah Cohoo. The sailor writes that qahwah is, quote, great merchandise, for it is carried to Grand Cairo and all other places of Turkey and to the Indias, end quote. Like a lawyer calling a surprise witness, Prideaux then quotes from the diary of another sailor, William Rivet, written in the same year, 1609, but from the port of Mocha rather than the interior, telling the story of Omar, who was, some legends tell us, the first person to roast and brew the coffee seed. Rivet uses Kaffa, Coffe, which is closer to the Persian pronunciation. In conclusion, Your Honor, it is our contention that as late as 1609, pronunciation of the word for coffee in the interior region of the Arabian Peninsula where coffee was grown remained closely tied to the original Arabic, while on the relatively cosmopolitan coast, especially the port city of Mocha, The effect of trade with the wider Mediterranean had begun to alter pronunciation, putting the word firmly on a path that would eventually lead to the word we pronounce coffee today in English. I think that's basically the point Colonel Prideaux is making. Then Mr. Euchers returns to the writer nicknamed Chatto, who is commenting on Prideaux. And this is the point where I wanted to give up on this chapter. Mr. Euchers references Chatto, then references Prideaux, then mentions Chatto referencing Prideaux.
Because you take the axle and put it up above the side of orbital frame to seat. Don't put the rivets. Don't just take a ladder frame and pull the seat when you're lifting a bar routine. Put the seat in force with the axle when the brake comes through the fall, and let it seat. And there you are.
Setting aside the topic itself, which I find challenging, Mr. Euchers uses some convoluted sequencing, at least for me. For Mr. Euchers, no doubt, he is telling the story about words, and the writers who comment on those words can come and go as they are needed to serve the story of the words. But man, oh man, when one is struggling to fully grasp the story of the words, this juggling of the commentators doesn't help. Never fear, and I'm talking to myself now, I'm confident we will have some big picture moments along the way to tie it all together. Fingers crossed. It seems Chatto wants to clarify that the change from qahwah to coffee is a phonetic change. I know this because that is an exact quote. He says Colonel Prideaux will admit that the change from qahwah to coffee is a phonetic change. Okay, once again I want to say, duh, and once again I think I might be obtuse to the underlying academic intentions. In any case, Chatto cites more diary entries from more travelers throughout the 17th century with a wide variety of spellings, and I think his point is that all of these people could have been hearing some simple variations in pronunciation of the same word, but how they chose to spell it in writing varied, and this should not confuse us as to the how and from whence the word evolved in English. And just to beat an empty piñata, Mr. Euchers adds some more citations of his own from more 17th century writers. I think that all of these 16th or 17th century writers, with few exceptions, whatever their country, seem to me to be expressing clear variants of the Arabic qahwah or the Turkish qahweh. I think this because I thought it, but also because Mr. Euchers says it. Quote, the inferences from these transitional forms seems to be 1. The word found its way into the languages of Europe from both the Turkish and from the Arabic. 2. The English forms, which have strong stress on the first syllable, have O instead of A and F instead of H. 3. The foreign forms are unstressed and have no H. The original V or W is retained or changed into an F. End quote. When Mr. Euchers says foreign, he means, of course, anything not English. In that quote, Mr. Euchers sums up, I think, the entire chapter. Within the parade of 17th century citations, Mr. Euchers includes Pedro Teixeira, who used, I think, qahwah, a variant in pronunciation of the Turkish qahweh, in 1610. He describes Teixeira as a Portuguese Jew. Mr. Euchers is not here stating that Pedro was a Jewish person from Portugal, I mean not primarily. The phrase Portuguese Jew refers to a specific group of Jewish people who experienced a very specific period of persecution, and unless I'm totally reading the history wrong, referring to them as Portuguese Jews would make them feel seen rather than dismissed as the object of bigotry. Note, Teixeira is the English pronunciation of Pedro's last name and not the Portuguese pronunciation, which is slightly, I'm sad to say, beyond the abilities of my tongue. Moving on, Mr. Euchers takes a paragraph to talk about how variations in spelling come from variance in pronunciation among different languages, specifically unstressed and stressed languages, the omission of H in the former and the conversion of H into F in the latter.
The letter H has a H sound.
F is a letter in the alphabet.
If your language is feeling stressed at this point, welcome to the club. The conclusion remains many smart people can not only trace the English word coffee back to the Arabic word qahwah, they can detail all the rest stops, shortcuts, backroads, misadventures, side trips, and cul-de-sacs it experienced along the way. Speaking of cul-de-sacs, the first sentence of the next paragraph of Chapter 1 is, quote, now for the French viewpoint, end quote. Many opinions are expressed by various French writers, but as far as I can tell, with one exception, someone who was committed to the Kaffa Ethiopia theory, they're all just rehashing variations on arguments already presented, so I'll stick with one of them, Jardin, already cited by Mr. Euchers as an inspiration in his preface, who opens and closes the French section. Mr. Euchers uses him to open the section by citing Jardin as writing, quote, as regards the etymology of the word coffee, scholars are not agreed and perhaps never will be, end quote. And he closes the French section by noting Jardin's conclusion, which ties up the chapter in a neat little bow, that whatever there may be of these various etymologies, it remains a fact that the word comes from an Arabian word, and that the peoples who adopted the drink have all modified the Arabian word to suit their pronunciation. That idea as well sums up the entire chapter. I might just footnote this section by saying that the, air quote, fact that the word comes from an Arabian word is really more of the predominant and long-standing theory. Jardin is saying etymologists are going to bicker, but whatever. Coffee comes from the Arabic, and all the different words we have today are only differences in pronunciation due to the differences in languages. To illustrate that point, Mr. Euchers then lists the word for coffee in 38 languages. I'm not going to read these 38 words. I'm going to ask Rochelle Berini, volunteer at LibriVox.org, to read the list. Just a reminder, you can listen to an audiobook of All About Coffee at LibriVox.org or their channel on YouTube. Rochelle?
French café, Breton café, German Kaffee, coffee tree Kaffeebaum, Dutch coffee, coffee tree Kaffeebohnen, Danish café, Finnish Kahvi, Hungarian Kave, Bohemian Kava, Polish qahwah, Romanian Kafje, Croatian Kaffa, Serbian Kava, Russian Kofi, Swedish Kafe, Spanish Cafe, Basque Kafja, Italian Cafe, Portuguese Cafe, Latin Scientific Kafja, Turkish Qahwah, Greek Kafeo, Arabic qahwah, coffeeberry bun, Persian qahwah, coffeeberry bun, Annamite Cafe, Cambodian Cafe, Dukni bun bound, Teluyan Kaprivitulu, Tamil Kapi Kotai or Kopi, Canarese Kapi Bija, Chinese Kiafe Tautse, Japanese Kehi, Malayan Kawa Kopi, Abyssinian Bon, Fulak Legal Cafe, Susu Hori Kaf, Marquesan Kapi Chinook Kaufi, Valapuk Kaf, Esperanto Kafva.
That concludes the chapter, but not the episode, because I want to circle back and talk about two of the people Mr. Euchers mentions in the chapter. First, Chatto. While Chatto was indeed a polyglot, someone who speaks or writes many languages, and a trained linguist, he is known to history primarily as an Indian revolutionary. An ardent communist, he spent much of his adult life as something of a revolutionary vagabond, traveling throughout Europe trying to rally support for India's independence while advocating, I think it fair to say, a militant socialist agenda. Like many international communists of that era, he ended up in Russia in the 1920s and became acquainted with Lenin. And like many acquaintances of Lenin, he was executed by Stalin in 1937 during the Great Purge at age 57. All of this greatly simplifies his life, I suppose it goes without saying, but I do find it fascinating that someone who led such an abundant life, even if that abundance came in the form of constant struggle, took time to comment on the etymology of the word coffee. Another name from Chapter 1 that I want to look at is Colonel Prideaux. William Francis Prideaux is something of an opposite to Chatto. He began his military career in India as part of the British occupation. He would spend most of his life as a soldier and diplomat in India and Ethiopia and Yemen. As part of a mission to Ethiopia in 1866, he was arrested by Emperor Theodore II and imprisoned for 2 years. Yemen would eventually become his adopted home, and he died in Aden in 1914. What he had in common with Chatto is that his career and his political life existed in adjunct to an intellectual commitment to linguistics and archaeology. Because these passions existed in the context of Ethiopia and Yemen, it's no surprise that Prideaux found time to think about and comment on the etymology of the word coffee. As mentioned, there are 33 writers and editors referenced in Chapter 1, and I've only expanded in brief on the lives of 4 of them. I will admit, I dream of an audio annotated All About Coffee where every name that appears in the text receives a biographical note, but I'd like to finish this podcast before I die. So, time for poetry, a few lines from Chapter 32, Coffee and Literature. A 1718 poem titled Coffee by a French poet named, I think, Guillaume Massé. As always, please pardon my French. I picked this passage because it seemed to me appropriate for this chapter, and it reveals what would have been in the 16th century a bias toward, or perhaps even a virtually exclusive belief in, the Arabian Peninsula as the birthplace of coffee. Quote, "Therefore come thou, whoever shall be possessed by a love for coffee, and do not regret having brought the healthful being from the far remote world of Arabia, for this is its bountiful mother country. The soothing draught first flowed from those regions through other peoples, thence through all Europe and Asia, and next made its way through the entire world. End quote. It's not Shakespeare, and I'm not Kevin Brana.
To be or not to be, that is the question.
But there you have it, and we're done. You've been listening to All About Coffee, a page-by-page podcast, written, read, and produced by me, Mike Ferguson, possessed by a love for coffee with no regrets. All About Coffee, a page-by-page podcast is an independent podcast brought to you by qahwah Specialty Coffee and presented by the Exchange Coffee Podcasting Network in beautiful downtown Providence, Rhode Island, atop the historic Tilden Thurber Building, home to the Exchange, Another Cup, Extra Shot, and Ristretto podcasts. Visit and explore at qahwahcoffee.com, where coffee is always a collaborative voyage. Our theme music is My Buddy by Henry Burr, originally recorded in 1922. You can email me with questions, thoughts, ideas, corrections, and pronunciations for coffee in Arabic and Turkish at allaboutcoffeepagebypage@gmail.com. Thanks for listening, and keep listening for a little bonus, 3 minutes of vintage Hills Brothers ads.
Okay, that's got it. Let's have some coffee.
Well, I could sure use some. The coffee's cold. I'll make some fresh.
Hold it. That's Hills Brothers coffee. Hills Brothers even tastes good reheated.
You expect Hills Brothers coffee to taste great when it's freshly made. The big surprise is that it still tastes good when you reheat it. Coffee that doesn't taste bitter when it's reheated is more than high quality, it's special quality. Hills Brothers has discovered that certain coffee beans hold their flavor longer. These flavor-holding beans go into Hills Brothers coffee. Then they're roasted just 4 pounds at a time, a special way to avoid scorching. No scorching, no bitterness. Try Hills Brothers coffee. Enjoy flavor so good you can even reheat it.
Hills Brothers coffee so unbeatable, and the proof of this is it's reheatable. Head for the hills.
Aroma.
Hills Brothers.
Real coffee aroma.
Hills Brothers. New instant coffee.
Enjoy real coffee aroma and wonderful fresh brewed taste. It's the first instant coffee that smells like coffee and tastes like a good coffee should.
Smells and tastes just like fresh brewed. New instant Hills Brothers coffee.
It's the first instant coffee that smells like coffee and tastes like a good coffee should.
Hills Brothers.
Coffee, coffee, richer, stronger, I'll last longer.
Follow me, men. Head for the hill. It's good, strong coffee.
It's Hills Brothers.
Coffee, coffee.
Richer, stronger, pound lasts longer.
This way, ladies. Head for the hill. A pound really does go a long way.
It's Hills Brothers.
Coffee, coffee.
Richer, stronger, pound lasts longer.
Come on, everybody. Head for the hill. Everybody seems to.
It's great coffee.
Coffee, coffee.
Richer, stronger, pound lasts longer.
Okay, coffee lovers, head for the hill.
Head for the Hills Brothers coffee.